The first thing that you need to do is pick a leader, and the leader is going to stick with you throughout the entire game. Now, if this is your first playthrough, I recommend picking either Augustus if you want to just build up and build a large empire and very nice cities, or go all the way down and pick Xerxes, King of Kings, if you plan on doing more fighting. Don't get me wrong, all the other leaders are pretty good as well, but some of them do require specific strategies in order for you to really benefit from them. Each leader comes with 2 memento slots that you can use to pick additional items that will give you additional bonuses depending on what item you pick. So that means you can kind of just customize your hero. Now, keep in mind that initially these things will be unlocked. You will need to gain some experience levels in order for them to be unlocked, so you will need to play about 1 or 2 games in order for both of these slots to be unlocked. And even then, not all of these items will be unlocked because they are once again gated behind getting more experience. Some of them are gated behind general experience, so just playing the game basically, and others are gated behind actually playing with specific leaders. So for example, you can see that if you play Augustus for a little bit, the first thing you will unlock is a memento that will give you an additional settlement limit per age. So this is just an example. You do not need these mementos in order to play the game, they are just additional bonuses. It is worth noticing that you can actually change your mementos between every age. So if you pick, for example, something that gives you an attribute point, that will give you an attribute point at the first age. And then if you keep that, you will get another attribute point at the start of the next age, or you can switch it out for something else and get a different benefit instead. If you're new to the game, I would highly recommend you start in the Antiquity age because, well, A, I think it's more fun, but B, if you start out in the Exploration or Modern age, you will get thrown in the middle of things, you probably won't know what's going on. If you started the game the first time around and you start your very first game, this screen actually doesn't even show up. It will automatically start you in the Antiquity age. So don't be confused if you don't see the screen if you just fired up the game for the first time. Then you'll also need to pick a civilization, and honestly all the civilizations have their own strengths and weaknesses, so there's no wrong choice here. But if you're going for a classic and pretty straightforward choice, you might as well pick Rome. There's nothing wrong with the default settings, but I would highly recommend that you turn up the difficulty a little bit if you are finding yourself winning too easily. When you first get into the game, you'll find yourself with just a single unit whose only purpose is to start your capital. Now, you might be wanting to look up a lot of YouTube videos that explain a lot about where you should find your first capital, but the answer in 99% of the cases is exactly where you start. The game is pretty good at giving you a good starting location. All you want is a couple of these resources around you that will give you certain benefits later on. And you want those resources to be in at most 3 steps away from your city, because that's the maximum range you will be able to gather them from your capital. So for example, this is actually a pretty good start because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these resources within 3 steps away from my city. If you do want to start walking around with your initial founding unit and you want to settle your city somewhere else, make sure you turn on this lens over here for settler, because you want to found your city in almost every instance in one of these light blue areas. These give you access to fresh water, which will give you free happiness on your town. If you don't have this, your town will be miserable. Well, not necessarily on lower difficulties, but there's really almost no reason to settle your first town out of fresh water if you can help it. Anyway, just click your unit, press this button over here, found a settlement, and you'll have your first city. If you click on your city, you can decide what you will start building there, and the answer is always a scout first. And then after that, you're going to want to build another scout. The first scout will be produced instantly after you press the next turn button. You're going to use this scout to explore the world around you. You want to know where your enemies are, you want to know where your friends are, and you want to know where special locations, like for example this one over here, is that kind of glow. These are special locations that you can visit once. The first player to find these will trigger these, so there's only a one-time use out of them, and they will give you special events that will give you bonuses. Your scouts also have a special ability called Search that will allow you to find these places a lot easier. Now keep in mind that once you press this, the turn for the scout will be over, so you won't be able to move anymore. The ideal thing to do is take one step with your scout and then press the button Search to get both benefits from moving at least one step and the benefits from surging. Now, keep in mind that some areas only allow you to take one step. For example, if you move your scout on this river over here, it will immediately end its turn, so you can do the 1-2 trick that I will show you. For example, I could move into this forest over here. That's just one step. Then I can press the search button, and discover a whole area around me. And then it turns out that there's actually another one of these places over here and another one over here. So I have 3 of these in range and I want to pick them up as quick as I can, because if another player reaches them once again, they will be gone forever. On your second turn, you'll also have to select a technology to start researching. Now, rather than picking it from this list over here, I recommend that you press the View Tree button, and you can kind of see what leads to which other technology later on. Every new technology will give you new benefits. If you see the plus sign, that means that that's a benefit that you will get passively and permanently from just researching the technology. That's always good to get. If you see something in a circle, that's a new building that you can build in every one of your cities or purchase in one of your towns. If you see something in a square, that's a world wonder that only one can be built of in the entire world. And then you have finally the white icons, which are new units that you can produce in your cities. In most cases, you want to start out with pottery and then pick up animal husbandry, unless you're on the coast and you have a lot of resources on the coast that you're going to be grabbing initially. Then you might want to consider sailing, but usually these two are the safer options to begin with. After a couple of turns, your city will first grow, and this is one of the most vital things in the game you need to know how to deal with. After a couple of turns, your city will first grow, and this is one of the most vital parts of the game you need to understand. Every time your city grows, you can select one tile within the borders of your city, and you'll get the stuff that is on that tile. So for example, if I click over here, I get a single food per turn, but if I click over here, I get 2 food per turn and 1 happiness. Now, it might seem obvious, just click whatever has the most yields, right? Well, no. Because every time you select a certain tile, you also get access to the tiles next to that for your next phase. You'll expand your borders to all the neighboring tiles, which means that if I select this tile now, I can also select this tile, and this tile on the next time my city grows. But if I want to have access, for example, to this gold, I need to expand to either this tile or this tile now to make sure that the gold is then within my borders, so the next time I can actually pick this up. So that means that it doesn't just matter what is on the tile itself, it also matters what tiles it connects to and the value of those tiles. In the early game, you mostly want to focus on getting as much food as you can, as well as many of these hammers or production, because both of those things will help your city grow. Food itself will obviously make sure you grow the population in your city faster, which means you can select more and more of these tiles to produce stuff on, and the hammers will help you build buildings and units. After food and production, I would say you want to pick up some beakers and some music notes, because those represent science and culture, which will help you research technologies either in the technology tree or in the civics tree, and that will help you progress your civilization into more advanced units and buildings. These golden coins and the happiness symbols are not a high priority usually. Don't get me wrong, they're nice. There's nothing wrong with getting these, but typically the other things I mentioned before will be better, especially in the early game. The same priority usually kind of holds for what of the special resources you want to pick up first. If you have something like gold, that's actually very good later on in the game, but for now, I'm not going to be buying any buildings, so having a 20% additional money going towards buying buildings is not going to do anything for me in the early game. However, if, for example, you find something like cotton right next to your city, that's going to be really useful, because that's actually going to give you both food and production just from getting access to that resource. But if you really want to min-max your picks, then you also need to pay attention to what type of building you're placing down. Because if I select to expand, for example, to this node over here, I'm placing down a farm. But if I do it over here, I'm going to be placing down a mine. Now, why is that important? Well, let's go back to the technology tree. Because this is where those passive abilities come in. For example, if we pick up pottery, all our plantations and clay pits will be improved. So if we don't have any of those are not going to do anything. But if we do have, for example, camps, woodcutters, or pastures, then we would be better off picking animal husbandry up first. That said, also keep in mind the buildings. If we are going to be making, for example, a brickyard, which is a pretty strong production building, that is not going to give us just one production by itself, but it's also going to once again boost our clay pits, mines, and quarries. So there's a really kind of a compounding impact that if you have a lot of different tiles, then it doesn't really matter what you pick. But if you have a lot of the same tiles that you happen to pick up anyway, then you might want to prioritize one or the other technology over each other. But it really depends on what you actually have around you. And if all of that sounds a little bit complicated and overwhelming, I don't blame you. But yeah, like I said 3 times by now, it's one of the most important mechanics of the game, so just keep practicing. In this example over here, it's actually quite a complicated example, I think, because honestly, these 2 tiles are obviously the best just by themselves. This tile would get me towards the gold, which will also give me some production because the gold will have a mine on it. Similarly, I could expand in this direction. That would allow me to pick up 2 new resources right after each other after that, but none of these resources actually have food on them, so that would give me a lot of production and some science actually as well, so all of that is really nice, but it's not going to get my city to grow any faster. So in this case, I'm leaning towards going down this route for the gold first, and then afterwards going up here for these resources, but there could be 1,000 different situations that might lead you to decide otherwise. Meanwhile, once your scout reaches one of these glowing places, you'll get a little event that pops up, and that typically will give you a choice. In this case, I can get some additional production or I can get some additional food. Now, which one of these choices is best is again situational. Sometimes it's obvious, some choices are way better than others. In this case, it's about 3 turns worth of production, so it would almost instantly finish my second scout. Or I can get about 4 turns worth of food, which will mean my city is going to almost instantly grow again. Which one of those is better? Well, you could make an argument for either choice. I am going to go with the food for now. Once you have your second scout, you of course are going to send that out to explore, but you want to start building something else next. Now the safe option is to build a warrior so you can defend yourself if needed. However, I find so far that in Civilization 7 you can get away with building a granary first and then building a warrior. The benefits of building a granary is that this is going to make every single farm you put down better, and as you can see, this is already going to give me 3 food, and every farm I build after that is going to give me 1 additional food on top of that. In terms of where to place your buildings, keep in mind that it's going to replace whatever is already on the tile. So you don't want to put it on a tile that has a massive amount of production, because then you're going to lose that, unless that makes the building even better, of course. Because even though it doesn't matter for the granary where you put it in terms of how much it's going to give you, for some other buildings that might actually matter. Some buildings care about being next to resources, for example, or they might care about being next to other buildings. You could go and stress over that and plan it out ahead of time, and that's something you might want to do if you're playing on the highest difficulties. For now, I would just say just keep placing this building down. Do pay attention how much it's going to get you now, and also keep in mind that you can build 2 buildings on a single tile. So even though if I place it over here, I might somehow later want to build another building in that specific location, I can. There's still 1 spot left. It won't be long before you run into another civilization, and I would recommend that you take note in what direction they came from. For example, this guy over here just came from over here, so it's most likely that his capital is going to be in this direction. Once you meet, you'll get the option to either just give them a neutral return that doesn't cost anything, but that also won't change your reputation, or you can spend 20 influence, which is this resource over here, and either become unfriendly with them or friendly with them. Now, typically, either one of these is going to be the best way to open, because keeping your neighbors friendly is going to make your life a lot easier than just immediately throwing things at their face and making them angry. The benefit of starting out with a friendly greeting is that you also will immediately get notified where their capital is. So now I know for sure that he is in this direction. He's not that far away from me, so that also means that if I want to start expanding with my first couple of settlements, I might want to do it in this direction just to make sure I claim this territory before he does. Assuming you have enough influence and they are willing to actually deal with you, you can spend some more influence on, for example, making some endeavors happen. These are 2-sided kind of exchanges where if you spend the influence and they accept it, you will get a nice amount, in this case culture. If they support it, so that means they will actually spend some influence on supporting this exchange as well, you get even more culture from this exchange as a result. This will last for typically 15 turns depending on the game speed that you have, and that in turn is going to give you, if this would be supported, a total of 90 culture in total. I'm just currently producing 11 myself, so you can see this can be pretty valuable. Not only that, it is going to increase your reputation with them, so again, it's a good way to keep them friendly while also getting some results out of that. You will also find these white units roaming around the map, and they will have their own cities as well. These are not full players, these are independent city-states that will only ever have a single city each, but they will have their own units and they will be roaming and exploring the map. and if they have the red border around them, like this one has over here, they will actually be hostile to you and attack you. Now you can interact with them similar to other civilizations. You don't have the same options, but if you befriend them, then after a little while, it actually takes a couple of dozen of turns, you will become their friend. And if you're the first player to do that, you will actually become their suzerain, as that is called. And that means that they will basically become part of your empire. They will give you some resources, they might give you some units, they will give you military support. And if you spend even more influence, you can actually incorporate them into your empire and take full control over their cities. Until then, and that's going to take a while, you will need to keep an eye out for these, because if they are going to be attacking you, well, you might lose a city or two, and they can even burn down your cities if you're not careful. After a little while, you'll discover your first civic, and then it gives you the option to change policies. That brings you to the government screen, in which you can select one of these cards and put them in this slot over here and gain the associated benefits. So I could either get a little bit more culture, or I can get some additional production and science. Which one of these options is better? Again, it depends. Typically I like initially getting some additional production and science, because typically you don't have a lot of science production going on, so this is a significant boost. But later on you'll get more and more of these cards, and you will have better options, so you can just take the one out and put something else in, and basically balance that based on what you need at that point in time. You can do this every time you discover a new civic. And if everything goes according to plan, you'll be getting quite a few civics, so you can change this up quite quickly and quite often. Now, there's a couple of very important things to know about the civics tree, which is basically just a secondary technology tree, but with a little bit of a twist. If you pick up mysticism, you'll be able to found a pantheon, which is basically a religion, and the options you get to base your religion on will depend on how many others have already picked options before you. Every option can only be picked by one civilization, so you might want to pick up mysticism pretty early on to get the best benefits. However, discipline is going to get you your first commander. This is a free commander that you automatically get once you pick up discipline, and commanders make everything in this game when it comes to fighting a lot easier. Then, last but not least, there's also the specific civics tree. It's not just a tiny little tree, but this is one that is specific to your civilization. The stuff in here no one else gets, or at least not in this order. So picking up these is typically a very good idea, because a lot of this stuff also carries over to the next age. Again, what you want to pick up first kind of depends on what you want to do. I typically go for mysticism first, just to make sure I lock in something that is good for me for my religion. Then I go for discipline to get that warrior up and running, and then again it depends a little bit, but looking at this civilization specific civics tree, that's a lot of C's in there, is typically a very good idea, because some of these options are really strong. Once you do unlock mysticism, you'll be able to pick up your pantheon, and which one you pick up depends again on what you're trying to do. Generally speaking, if you can pick up city patron goddess, I would recommend that you do, because it's a really strong one. And influence is pretty hard to come by in other ways. The fertility rights is already picked, as you can see over here, is also a pretty good general one, because getting your cities to grow faster is never bad. But there's other options as well. Goddess of the Harvest, I think, is pretty good and all round. And there's also God of the Sun that gives you a little bit of everything. So if you don't know what you're going to be picking, this makes the altar just a pretty good random building to place down. Around the same time, you should also have some narrative events popping up that might give you quests, and these will be specific to either your leader or your civilization, and that means they're going to be different every time you play. Now, what option to pick depends really on what you want to do. There's always an option in there that basically says, I don't want a quest, just give me something now, and that's a fine choice. It's typically also going to give you the worst reward. If you go for some of the other options, then you are going to need to put in some work. That's probably going to take you at least a couple of hours of play to do that. But once you do it, you get a significant reward. For example, in this case, I get either 5 culture for completing 3 monuments. Monuments are going to get me culture anyway, so this is really if I would want to go down the culture route. Or I could say, well, no, I'm going to do some fighting, so having a commander with 3 promotions is probably something I'm going to do anyway. And then getting a 15% bonus towards training infantry is definitely a nice reward to get as well. So again, it just depends on what you're going to be doing. Once you get your culture going, you're also going to need to pick a government. The way governments work is that once you hit a celebration, which is triggered by collecting enough happiness, it's going to happen about a handful of times during an age, maybe less depending on how much happiness you have. You are going to be able to pick between one of two bonuses depending on what government you have. So let's say you pick Classical Republic. Once you get a celebration, you can either get 20% additional culture for 10 turns, or you can get 15% production towards wonders for 10 turns. And similarly for the other governments, you again have two options and you can pick one of those when you get a celebration. So you have little control over when you actually get a celebration. Typically, at least one of these options is always going to be good. For example, 20% food, 20% science, or 20% culture. So I would recommend picking the government based on the main thing that you want to be doing anyway. If you're going to go for a very science-based build, pick despotism. If you're going to go for a lot of culture, pick Classical Republic, and so on. But again, you might make a different choice depending on your strategy. After a little while, your granary should be done, and then I recommend that you build a warrior and then a settler, because by now you should have a city large enough to be capable of producing a settler. A settler is going to allow you to start your next settlement, and you want to start claiming your territory around you as quickly as possible before someone else does that. However, remember those hostile other units that might be roaming the map. You do not want to send out your settler all by itself. I would recommend that you send a warrior along with it to protect it. Once you get that first settler out, start expanding towards your enemies. If you don't do it, they will do it instead, and they will pick up all these juicy little resources on the map, claim all the territory, and you will not have any room left for yourself. So, of course, making sure that if you are doing that, get some defenses as well, because your enemy might not like it, declare war on you if you leave your cities undefended. You're going to be able to place down a total of 3 settlements initially, but you can increase that limit as you go. You can go over the limit as well, but you get a happiness penalty for doing so. That will reduce all the production in your cities, so be careful to not overdo that. When you select your settler, you will again get this colorful screen, and I again want to remind you that it's typically best if you can to place down your settlements on one of these blue tiles, because that will have fresh water. The game will also give you some suggestions on good placements for cities. Typically that will be in range of several resources, but you don't need to stick with that. You can just decide where to pick your cities yourself, but again, ideally close to several resources, claiming some territory so that you can make sure your enemies don't, and putting it on fresh water for the additional happiness. There's nothing wrong with quickly expanding your territory with a lot of settlers, just make sure you bring enough army as well. Typically you want to have about 2 or 3 units per city, especially on your front lines. That should keep them relatively safe and at least buy you enough time to bring in the rest of your army if you do get attacked. Once you get access to the Discipline Civic, you are also going to spawn your first army commander. Now this army commander is going to be the backbone of your army. It's not going to do any fighting by itself, but it does have quite a bit of hit points. But it's going to make everyone fighting around it better, and every time someone around him fights, he is going to gain experience, which you can then use to upgrade him. There's a lot of different talents that you can pick, and you need to pick them in order. Some of them are more for defense, some are more for offense. You can either have them improve your cities. It really depends on what you want to do with that particular army commander. That will decide which ones you're going to pick. If you go all the way down a tree, so you pick the last one in a tree, you can also pick up one of these commendations. These are like super skills that make your army commanders even stronger. And remember, these army commanders are going to come with you from age to age, but making them even more important for the long term. The last thing you need to know about these commanders is they make moving your army around a lot easier. What you can do is you can select them, you can press this button over here, Assemble Army. That will suck all the adjacent units into your army commander if they can. Initially it can fit in 4 units. If you do that, as you can see, the pikeman is now in here. If I start moving this commander around, the pikeman will just move along with it, so it makes it very easy and convenient. If I actually want to fight with my pikeman, I can select him, say leave army, and then I can decide where it's going to be spit out, for example over here. Now this is a very easy way to move your army around and make sure that the position is correctly if you do want to start attacking or defending. Then finally, let's talk about win conditions. There are 4 legacy paths which represent culture, military, science and economic that you need to progress through to get benefits to carry on to the next age. If you don't make enough progress, you will enter a dark age. Long story short, you don't want that. You want at least some progress, at least towards the first milestone in each of these paths. And you need to do that before the end of the age. A typical age, if you're playing at normal speed, will last about 120 turns or so. It depends a little bit on what else is happening in the world, but that's the ballpark you need to aim for. Every time one of the players hits one of these milestones, not only do they get a little bit of a bonus towards the next age, but you also progress the age that you're currently in. So the faster your opponents are going, the faster the age will end. Now what do you actually need to do? For culture it's pretty simple, just build wonders. Conquering wonders, as I found out the hard way, is actually not going to be sufficient, so you need to build some wonders yourself. Ideally at least 2, so you at least get the first milestone, but if you build the entire 7 wonders of the world, you complete the golden age, and that gives you an additional benefit on top of all the other benefits you already got towards the next age. Military is pretty straightforward as well, just have a large empire. You can get an empire large by just building settlements yourself, but every settlement you conquer counts for 2. So take that into consideration, because you need to do some combat and some basically warring to actually get to the golden age. Science is all about getting codices. You're going to need to build the libraries in which you can put these codices, and you can pick these up from some random events, but also from specific technologies in the technology tree. They will just grant you a codex from the get-go. Then last but not least, there's the economic legacy path that just requires you initially in the ancient age to assign resources to your settlement. So this is just about, again, having a large empire, getting a lot of resources in that empire, and then assigning them to your settlements. You're probably going to need to upgrade a couple of them to cities in order to make sure you have enough room to fit everything in there. And you can also get more resources if you don't have enough by yourself, by making trade routes to your opponents and to your city-states in order to gain more resources. How to get trade routes might not immediately be obvious, so what you need to do is you need the Civic Code of Laws that will give you a free merchant and the ability to create more merchants. And then once you have one of those, you can see at the merchant itself who you can connect to with your trade routes. All you need to do then is send that unit over to the cities it suggests, and then once you reach there, you can establish a trade route. It will absorb the merchant, so you have to spend and build an additional merchant for every single trade route, but once you have it up and running, it is just going to give you an additional amount of gold as well as some resources. And once you gain some new resource, you might want to go to the resource allocation screen over here. That shows you what the resources are assigned to which town or city. Keep in mind that some resources can only be assigned to a city and some resources can be assigned anywhere, so that includes the towns. Always keep an eye on what these resources are actually giving you. For example, the gypsum over here will give you more production if you assign it to a different city than your capital, but some other resources might not care where they are placed at all. I've heard a couple of people struggling with getting enough space for all those resources to get to the economic victory path, but it's actually pretty easy as long as you have enough science to research both currency and navigation. The market that you get from currency gives you additional resource space in your cities, and the lighthouse for navigation does exactly the same thing. Similarly, if you're working on the scientific path, you can check how many codices you have under the Great Works button over here. That shows you how many of these great works you have. In the ancient age, these will only be codexes, and those will give you science. You need to make sure you have enough libraries and things like that to put them in. This should cover the large majority of everything you need to know in order to be successful at playing Civilization 7. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And please don't forget to like the video if you actually found it useful. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.